through some frameworks. And second, why is it important? And I'll show you some case studies about that. So first of all, yes, who am I? I'm Kisa. I'm the Director of Innovation Facilitation at btrax. Innovation facilitation is such a big term, but what I do is basically, I do everything to help companies make product that actually solve people's problem, because it's really hard to actually make sure that the product is very valuable, that actually solve people's problem. So we basically do design thinking workshop, design sprints, UX consulting for these kind of companies. And I also have a marketing background, and I'm passionate about design strategy. And I also dance Lindy Hop when I'm at work. So if there's a Lindy Hopper here, please come talk to me. So that's who I am. Oops. So what is value proposition? How many of you have heard of the term value proposition here, besides this event? Okay, cool. I think half of you guys. So value proposition, if you look up for it on the internet, there's a lot of explanation out there, and this is one of my favorite ones. So basically, a value proposition refers to the value a company promises to deliver to customers should they choose to buy their product. It's a promise. It also says a value proposition is also a declaration of intent or statement that introduces the company's brand to consumers by telling them what the company stands for, how it operates, and why it deserves their business. So it's more beyond one single product, but it's more about like why the company exists as well. By the way, this is from Investopedia. This is my favorite one. But this explanation, it's too long. I'm pretty sure you guys didn't read it too, but I think this is too long. So I would put it this way. What is value proposition? It's the reason why customers buy your products. Simply put, that's what it is. And also, what's the reason? So when you say it's the reason why customers buy your product, what's that reason? What's the reason why customers buy your product? The reason is basically because you're providing this. This is value proposition. So this is basically the Venn diagram about customer and what the customer really wants. And this one is about the company. Basically, it's what you provide. This part is about the competitor, what your competitors provide. So it's basically this part where the customer's need and your value is need, but it's not something that your competitor provides. So again, value proposition is what your users really want and what you can provide, but what the competitors don't provide. That's what value proposition is. But then how do we make that happen? How do we make sure that your value is basically fits in this part? There's a cool tool for that, and I want to introduce that tool today. It's called Value Proposition Canvas. How many of you have heard of it? Great, only one person. Yeah. So I guess this is something that you can bring back today. So Value Proposition Canvas is a canvas, a framework that makes sure that you can use to make sure that you're actually providing a value to the customer. So it looks like this. Basically, it consists of three main parts, which is product, customer, and the substitute. So how you fill it out? First, you write down your company and your product, and then second, you write down the substitute or the competitor that the user would think of when you think about your product as well. And then what you do is you start from here. Customer jobs, that's basically the needs of the customer. So you write down the need of the customer here, and then you break it down into gains and pain. So based on the needs, there should be a gain and pain related to that. And then what you do after that is you come to this part. You write down the product and service. Here you write down all the features and the characteristics of the product that you have. And then you fill out those two parts. So you make sure that the gain, you translate your features into gain creator and pain reliever. And you make sure that your gain creators is actually a creating a gain to this customer and actually killing the pain, relieving the pain that you write down right here. So that's how it works. And then this actually fits to the idea that I talked about earlier. So this part is about the company, and this part is about the customer. And to make this fit to each other, it means that this part is working. It's saying that it's this part. And also by writing down the substitute and competitor, it makes sure that it's something that your competitor don't provide. So basically, by using this framework, you can make sure that you have a value proposition. And I'm not going to go deeper into how to use it or how actually you fill it out, but I will give you 2 tips in order to use this. It's mainly about the customer side. First, when you write down the customer job, the needs, make sure to break it down into these 3 parts, which is the functional job and the social job and the emotional job. This is very important because when you talk about customers' needs, people always talk about the functional job. It's about how the feature work, how the practical needs of the people have. But actually, those functional needs would not be of value unless it's attached to the emotional part. So a function is value only because it creates a positive emotion. That's why it's really important to break it out into those 3 parts. And also, when you fill out the substitute part, think of the substitutes from the customer's perspective, not from your perspective. That's why you should include not only the competitor, but the substitute. For example, I read this article about the gum, the sales of the gum. So apparently the sales of the gum rapidly decreased after iPhone came out. Can anyone imagine why? Actually, it's because whenever people would buy a gum, it's when you're waiting for the register at the supermarket. So that's why people will buy a gum, but after iPhone came out, people were looking at the iPhone all the time, so they won't buy the gum anymore. So it's not saying it's a direct competitor, but I think you get the idea. You have to think from the customer's perspective. What's the substitute? What options would people have when they think about your product? And that's completely different from the product, from the company's point of view, because whenever you think about competitor, you always think about the direct competitor, what kind of other players that in your industry. But always, it's important to think about the customer's perspective. So these 2 are the main tips. And when you apply that into, let's say, a gym, you're kind of thinking about creating a gym. If you think about it, the value proposition will look like this. So first, the substitute of competitor would also include a workout YouTube, because that's where you go when you want to work out. And the functional job, let's say the functional job was to keep exercising every day. The customer wanted to keep exercising every day, and it was really hard for her or him to keep up exercise. The social job should be to have people compliment her. The social is like the social aspect of the needs. So that by exercising every day, she wants people to compliment her. And then the emotional job is to feel proud of herself by doing all those things. So breaking up into those three parts, you translate those needs into gain and pain. So the gain could be a gym that is easy to go because you want to keep up exercising every day. And then pain could be a program that is too intense. So is it a too hard workout, too intense program, like an exercise program every day? You can't keep up with doing that. So if you want to keep exercising every day, a program that is too intense would be a pain. So if after writing all those down, you might want to think about your product side too. So the product should be, let's say it's a major gym chain, and the features or the aspect that they have is many locations, many workout program. And then you translate it into those gain creator and pain relievers. Because the customer scan is easy to go, and because you have many locations, close to home would be the gain creator. And because the pain for the customer is the program that is too intense, and because you have many workout programs, light program would be a pain reliever. So you make sure that these two are matching with each other. And by that, you make sure that you have a value proposition. So that's how it works. Is there any question or any comments on that? Cool.
Just the one, I mean, the connection has to be also with the jobs and the product services somehow. I mean, the linear one or no?
I would say only this part. If you're connecting this side, it means that these two are connected too, because you translate from here.
So I always get confused in this team because of those two arrows.
Right.
I mean the product and the customer, but at the same moment, do they mean the job and the service?
Yeah, that's true. Well, basically, I think this two part is the most important part. Yeah. So, yeah. So that's what value proposition is. I hope you guys have a better idea of what it is. But why is it important? I think it's because you always forget this. So basically, you're providing a service or product, and the customers see it from their point of view, and it's really, really difficult to not forget that you're here and the customer's right here. Maybe they're looking at your product in a really different way, and you never know because you're always on this side. So it's a value proposition. By doing this, it makes sure that you also make sure to know the customer's point of view. And another thing is this. So someone's trash could be another one's treasure. Meaning like one customer would value one thing, but that won't be a value for another person. And it's really obvious, but sometimes we forget that. So value proposition is a really good reminder of that. And then, for example, for this, like one person's trash is another person's treasure thing, it's really hard to remember that. And the example is that, let's say your value is to save time, like time saving. You see everywhere, like time saving. Our product will save time for you, like it's time saving all the time. And we sometimes forget that time saving could not always be a value to everyone. For example, if it's a really busy businessman, it will surely be a value of time saving, like he's busy all the time. But if that's someone who just retired and don't know what to do and looking forward for some ways to kill time, time saving may not always be a value for that person. So you never know like what could be of value, and you can't assume that one value could be of value for everyone. And then this thing happens a lot, especially when you're entering overseas market, because they have different value system. And it's really tricky. For example, this has been the main search engine in Japan for a long time, which is Yahoo Japan. This has been the main search engine in the United States for a long time. And you can see how intense this is. It has so much information in it, and it's so simple. So people value different things. This one is better. It's valuable for Japanese people because it makes you feel secure that there's enough information out there. Whereas this one, it makes you feel that it's easy to use, which would be a value for the people in the US. So there is a cultural difference. Another example is obviously Japanese people, when they meet each other, they bow like forever. Whereas in the States or like European country, they hug all the time. So being respectful is very valuable for Japanese people, whereas being intimacy is very valuable for other countries. So like for us, like respect is very important, and respect is the most important thing. Like as a Japanese, it's very like it's a common sense almost, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a value for everyone else out there in the other country. So you shouldn't forget that, but it's really hard to not forget those things. So that's why this is important. When I say you have to break it out into functional job and social job and emotional job, that's why it's very important, because if you break it down into functional jobs and emotional jobs too, it would identify why why time saving is important. And writing down those things will make you identify why the value is of value to that kind of person. So breaking down into these three things is very important. You may think that it's pretty obvious. That's a pretty obvious thing, but people forget that all the time. For example, Walmart, when they enter the Japanese market, it ended up kind of being a failure. And the main reason, there's a lot of comments out there, like the reason why they failed, but basically they didn't know that everyday low price will not spark joy for Japanese people. Which means like they offered like everyday low price, and that's what Walmart is special about. But for Japanese people, everyday low price means everyday not low price. So it doesn't really spark joy for Japanese people. So that was one example for not considering enough about the value proposition. Another example is Krispy Kreme donuts. Some of you may remember it was really popular in Japan in a really short term, but in a long term it ended up a failure. It's shutting down a lot of shops there, and then there's a lot of reason why they failed, but the main reason I would say is that they didn't know that the donuts from America is merely a novelty. So like people thought Krispy Kreme is like a donut, is like a so American donut. And that could be a value, but just like as a novelty. So people perceive crispy donuts not as a really good donut, but like an American donuts experience kind of. So, and Krispy Kreme kind of didn't know Japanese people have that kind of like novelty thing for American culture. So that's another example. Another example where Japanese companies try to enter the US market and fail because of value proposition is this one called Ikinari steak. How many people know Ikinari steak? So Ikinari steak is it's a fun place actually in Japan where Ikinari means all of a sudden, and steak is like obviously steak. It's a place where you can eat a good quality steak at a relatively low price, but you have to eat it really fast. And in fact, the people stand up and eat it. So it's like a fast steak kind of. And then it went really viral in Japan, and they try to enter the US market, and they open a lot of shops in New York, but they end up shutting down a lot of shops there. And there's a lot of like controversial discussion going on why they failed, but basically they didn't know that eating quality steak really fast and even standing is pretty confusing for the US people, for the people in the US, because steak is something that you eat, you just sit down and eat, whether if it's cheap or not, you want to sit down and like take time and eat. So it was pretty confusing for the people in the US, and it wasn't really a value to them. So this is another example of not defining the value proposition and to fail overseas. So it happens all the time actually. We do a lot of cross-cultural consulting, design consulting, and a lot of people will come to us and say like, hey, like we need a marketing, like distribution, we do like digital marketing, but they don't know what their value is to that market. So like people talk about like their marketing distribution like all the time, but it's really important to start from value proposition. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much it, but I want to wrap up a little bit, recap a little bit. So first, what is value proposition? It's basically the reason why customers buy your product, and what you provide the customers really need, and your competitors don't. So that's the 3-Venn diagram. And use value proposition canvas to identify it. Why is it important? Because you often forget customers' point of view, and you never know a customer's value system, especially overseas. And the key is to break it into practical, functional, social, and emotional needs. And you may think this is very obvious, but people skip this all the time. Yeah, so always start by defining your value proposition. Thank you so much.